A length of silicone tubing, a cheerful card, a cup of water, a bottle of pills. My story is about little things that become big things because they touch people. I'm a designer, and a lot of the success I've had began with an accident. One day, my grandmother took my grandfather's medication. Her name was Helen. His name was Herman. They were both prescribed the same drug, but just different dosage strengths. Same initials, H. Adler, and the pill bottles looked practically identical. Here she was, a Holocaust survivor, in danger again from a stupid mix-up. As a designer, I realized that I know things about people that the pharmacy industry was missing. I could fix this. What I learned solving that problem so that it wouldn't happen again is the idea that I want to pass on to you today. If you want to change the world, go to the Gemba. Gemba is a Japanese term. It translates as the real place, the place where the work is done. For a Tokyo reporter, the Gemba might be the scene of a crime. For a surgeon, it's the operating room. For the drug maker, the Gemba is the lab. But for the people who take the drugs, like my grandmother, this is the Gemba. This is where we see what really happens and what needs changing. It's where we discover the little things that turn into be the big things. For example, it's where I learned that information on these bottles are incredibly inconsistent and difficult to understand. And not just because of poor type size and bad layout, but you actually have to turn the bottle in a full circle to read the informations. And oftentimes it's covered by a warning label. There's also no hierarchy of information, which means something very important, like let's say the name of the drug, ends up at the bottom of the label. It could easily be missed or confused for a manufacturer's name or a generic name. And oftentimes I learned that when you go home and you get these sheets of paper that get stapled to the bag, 9 times out of 10 they end up on the trash can. And in the rare occasion that they don't, this is what you're left with. Tedious lines of text that are difficult to read and really hard on the eye. As a designer, one of the first things I learned is that your eye gets tired after reading about 10 to 12 words. That's why books are set the way they are. For an even faster read, we have newspapers set in columns. This is twice the average line length, at 22 words per line. There's kerning issues, leading issues. I won't bore you with the designer jargon, but it's no wonder why it ends up in the trash. So the solution that came from this Gemba changed the way 1,500 Target pharmacies package and dispense their medication. And it also opened my eyes up to a lot of the issues that the hospital and the healthcare industry was facing. How many of you have ever been hospitalized? Wow, that's a lot. None of us go to a hospital to get sick, but a lot of us do. In fact, 100,000 people, nearly 100,000 people died last year from hospital-acquired infections. And the top cause are catheters. And the Gemba for catheterization is the bedside, where there's you, the nurse, and the catheter. You're not looking forward to it. No way. The nurse is not looking forward to it. But the catheter is very excited. It wants to jump around and flail about and jump right off that sterile field, which is how it picks up a lot of the germs that causes the infection. Your typical Foley catheter comes in a 1-layer tray. The top layer has all the tools and utensils you need to perform the catheterization, and the bottom has this catheter wound up tight, making it very difficult for the nurse to have to work within the 4 walls of such a small box, which was part of the problem. So our goal was to make this a calmer experience. So we developed a 1-layer tray that simplifies the steps and keeps the catheter from going wild. Now there are not only fewer infections, but the nurse and the patient feel a whole lot better about the experience. Going to the Gemba gives us the eyes to see all the steps that go into a larger action, like figuring out how much and which medication to take, or inserting a catheter correctly and keeping it from going wild. But the other ingredient you need is empathy. Don't create for the world, create for a person. We have to understand who touches and who is touched, and every step along the way, put ourselves in the person's shoes. What would we do if we were she? How would we feel? What would we need next? I've had the good pleasure of working with the great designer Milton Glaser for 5 years. And one of the things he taught me was that some of our most valuable moments are in that uncomfortable zone when we haven't quite solved the problem. It's when the pieces of the puzzle aren't fitting that we're most fertile. And if we're wise, we'll learn to be more comfortable in that uneasy state for as long as possible, because if you're open to it, a lot more of the solution, you'll discover a lot more of the solution the longer you stay in there. Here's an example. When we brought this new tray into the Gemba to test how nurses and patients actually reacted to the system, we learned that our one-layer tray was a great success, but that patient education was really not evident at all. This information is dreary and unattractive, and it usually wound up in the trash because the nurse had too much going on, and she would just, after the catheterization, she would just take everything in her eyesight and try and get out of there as soon as possible. So this wasn't just waste, it was a wasted opportunity. So we wanted to transform it from something that was forbidding into something that was more welcome. And we designed a Hallmark type card that nurses can give their patients. The cards are cheerful and inspiring, and we hired my favorite illustrator, Rodica Prado. I chose a very heavy, uncoated, toothy cardstock. We set the type just perfectly, and then we placed it in the most unexpected place, right inside the top flap of a catheter tray. The nurse can't miss it, and as soon as she opens it up, just by touch alone, she says, "Wow, this doesn't belong to me. I can't throw this out." And that shift in behavior was really an important one, and it made her proud to give it to her patient. The patients love it too because they can keep it by their bedside. And as one nurse manager told me, it accidentally educates the family members because, you know, we're all so nosy. What's the first thing you do when you go visit someone in a hospital? You look at their cards, and now you're getting educated on preventing CAUTI. This was an example of a little thing that turns into a big thing that touches someone. And everyone's happier because we stayed in the Gemba longer and didn't rush to solve the problem. Sometimes the Gemba isn't where we think it is. If you want to solve the problem of educating girls in rural Africa, the Gemba isn't the school, it's the well. Girls spend hours fetching water, hours upon hours fetching water every day. Their families can't afford to send them to school until they solve the water problem. Poverty is a big problem in India. A newsflash, I know. There are 400 million people who live completely outside of the system. They can't put money in a bank. They can't take out a loan. They can't get a driver's license or register to vote. They get no government assistance. 400 million people in India. How do you solve that? Well, you start by giving Charan Singh here a way to prove who he is, and then you multiply it by 400 million. Charan has no birth certificate, no identification of any kind other than his own say-so. Now, the Adhar project is using biometrics to identify everyone. They've been at it for 3 years, and now 275 million people can finally prove who they are, can finally tap into the system. I think that's changing what's possible for a nation, one person at a time. Not long ago, my work was part of a study on wound care dressings. And in this study, each nurse was given a state-of-the-art dressing. Wound care dressings are highly sophisticated products. And they were each given a state-of-the-art dressing and asked to apply it to a wound model. All of these kits came with instructions on how to use it, but not one nurse applied the dressing correctly. Here were 68 professionals batting zero. It's very scary. The good news is that was the control group. In the test group, nearly 9 out of 10 nurses did the job perfectly. I'm pretty sure you all would want the dressing that worked perfectly, right? But it was actually the same exact dressing, but with just a huge improvement in care. All we did was change the labeling and the packaging to change the way the nurse uses and understands the product. We didn't solve for the world, we solved for a person, the nurse, and that made all the difference. Care is what people do or don't do, and to me, that is what design is about. It's thinking about the places where the work is done and making those places our desks. It's thinking about the people who do the work and being there with them every step of the way as they do it. Brian Collins, another designer who's been both colleague and teacher, likes to say, the personal is the universal. My grandmother's medicine cabinet is really millions of people's medicine cabinets. That crazy overexcited catheter is the vector for millions of hospital-acquired infections. What the nurse reaches for next when she's changing a dressing tells the story of how wound care can go better for millions of people. You've noticed I haven't shown too many of my design details today because they're not really the point. My goal today is to give you something that you can bring back to your creative world. And that's a place to go to, the Gemba, and eyes to see what needs to change there. Let's see if you can see what I see. Lately, my Gemba has been hospital operating rooms, following the life stories of surgical procedure trays. There's a different tray for every operation, but they all basically look alike. They're all big and bulky and blue. A big blue wall in central sterile supply rooms. You can't tell which is which. You pull one off the shelf and it's the wrong one, and there goes a $500 or $1,000 tray that can't go into the OR. It's supposed to be latex-free. It has latex in it. One little thing and poofed. I'm sure none of you have been in central sterile supply rooms before, but, oh, someone has. But I bet you can picture that big blue wall of same-looking trays filled with life or death instruments. And I bet you know what the problem is and that you can solve it. In the Gemba, we learn that there is no best way. There's always a better way. But the trick is to be there to see it. Go to the real place where the work is done. Watch, ask, solve at human scale. The little things are the big things. Thank you.